I was just with a customer last week who had two mass specs that were having ghost peak issues. The root cause of the ghost peaks was injection volume, which caused backflash. We changed the split vent trap and the ghost peaks disappeared. This solved the issue for a while, but sooner or later, the customer would see random ghost peaks again if they don't address their backflash problem.
Let's discuss exactly what backflash is. This happens when the vapor volume exceeds the liner volume. And where does the sample go? Everywhere. The problem is that the vapor can condense on the cooler part in the top of the injector lines, or wherever, because it isn't as hot there. That condensed sample will still have a headspace or a vapor which can be swept forward onto the column. And the image we're looking at here is the temperature profile of a typical injector versus the oven temperature. As long as the column is hot enough, that vapor will still go and not cause any problems. But if the column is cool, it's possible for that vapor to now collect and trap on the front of the column. Now, as long as that's a low concentration, you probably won't see anything. But as you fortify this condensed sample by making more injections, you can get it to a high enough concentration that you'll actually see bonus peaks in every run. This carryover is in the injector. The only way to get rid of it is to clean the injector or to set up a bunch of clean solvent blanks with a high volume to flush it out. But if you don't change your conditions, the temperature, the injection volume, the solvent type, it's just going to happen again.
Here's what we're talking about: the weldment assembly. The weldment assembly can be cleaned or replaced, especially if you're running pesticides or semi-volatils. You may find some residual material coats the weldment. You want to clean it to minimize the inlet activity. You don't have to remove the inlet to clean it. I just removed it for this example. First, you would have to prepare the inlet by removing the column from the bottom, the inlet consumables from the top, and disconnect the split line over here. Then you would take a long Q-tip soaked in solvent. If you're using hexane to clean the syringe, hexane should work. Then you would run a long Q-tip along the sides of the weldment to remove any contaminants.
So if you're getting sample backflash, there are steps you can take to prevent it. You can reduce the injection volume, lower the inlet temperature, change solvents, and/or use a larger volume liner. You can also try pressure pulsing the injection if you have that capability. Pressure pulsing is done by setting the injection mode to one of the pulsed modes, either pulsed splitless or pulsed split. A window will open up to ask you what pressure you would like to do. We simply go into the inlet section and we notice there's 4 modes: split, splitless, pulse split, or pulse splitless. We set it to one of the splitless pulsed modes, and now we have to determine how high of a pulse do you want to go. I typically like to use 2 times the current pressure, or as much as 3 times. Making sure, of course, that I don't use a higher pressure than what I have going to the GC or higher than my inlet is rated. The standard EPC, or electronic pneumatic control module, is rated to 100 psi. But we do have a high pressure EPC that goes to 150 psi. The time for the pulse is mostly determined by how long the sample is being transferred to the column. For a split injection, typically 3 to 6 seconds is plenty of time for the pulse. But for splitless injection, you may want to pulse up to 30 to 45 seconds. I generally like to pulse it for just a few seconds less than my purge activation time, but I have met analysts that prefer to pulse a few seconds longer than their purge activation time. Try both and see what works better for you. It may take a little trial and error to dial it in, but these are good starting points. Pulsing should sharpen the sample band onto the column and could enhance sensitivity by putting more of it on the column. Remember, what we are ultimately trying to do is keep the sample from overloading the inlet, prevent that backflash from occurring. The size of the vapor cloud produced upon injection is dependent on 4 things: the inlet temperature, the carrier gas head pressure, the physical properties of the solvent being used, and the volume of injected sample. You can download our free vapor volume calculator to help you with this. When it comes to the liner selection, there's actually quite a lot to consider: deactivation, glass wool, how much glass wool is used, the volume of the liner, the tapers, top or bottom, thermal mass considerations, and how that affects volume.
That sounds like a lot to cover. Can we go back to our ghost peak issue now?
Yeah, sorry. Liner selection is a huge topic for another discussion. Let's get back to ghost peaks.
The other issue to consider is that you might be getting ghost peaks due to septum bleed. It's important to use high-quality septum appropriate for the inlet temperature. When the septum gets older, it can begin to crack and core or just degrade due to thermal stress, which can cause contaminants to bleed into your inlet onto your column. I can check for that by replacing my septum. I already took you through a pretty thorough GC inlet maintenance process, and that included replacing the septum. Sometimes all you need to do is replace the septum to correct your problem.
In fact, some people have attributed these septa peaks to the column, since they typically see siloxanes if they have a mass spec. The key is that they are peaks. Remember, columns can't chromatograph themselves. They won't give peaks. If the column is bleeding, the background signal goes up because there isn't a point source for the bleed. The entire column bleeds. If you get a peak, something entered the chromatographic process and gave a peak. And that's how we know it's something outside of the column, and in this case, the septa. It bleeds and it collects on the front of the column when the column's cool, and then the peaks chromatograph when we go through a temperature program.
Have we gotten all our ghost peak problems?
Not yet. Another thing we should consider is whether you might be getting carryover from previous injections or semi-volatile contamination. If the ghost peaks widths tend to be broader than the normal sample peaks right around them in the same part of the chromatogram, this is usually sample carryover. You'll see two examples on the screen what carryover looks like. This carryover indicates that not everything is eluting from the column before it cools down for the next analysis. Sometimes you won't even see the problem, ghost peaks, until much later runs, 6 or 7 runs into it, maybe more. These artifacts, the ghost peaks from sample 1, may be showing up in sample 20, and of course that means there's something for sample 21, sample 22, and so on and so on. If this is your issue, then you should extend your bakeout at the end of each analysis. You could also do a periodic bakeout for higher boiling semi-volatile contamination removal. But limit your bakeout to 1 to 2 hours and don't exceed the thermal limits of the column. So let's summarize the key points for ghost peaks. Start with a high purity solvent and take care to avoid contamination in sample prep.
Check your gas lines and purge them, especially if you've changed the filter. Perform GC inlet maintenance.
Minimize backflash by looking at your liner volume, injection volume, solvent choice, inlet temperature all play a role in the vapor volume created in the injector. Pressure pulsing the injection if you have EPC is another strategy to minimize backflash. You can download our vapor volume calculator for free at www.agilent.com/chem/flowmeter to help you with these decisions.
One of the key takeaways here is you won't have to go through all these steps to solve your ghost peak issue. If you minimize backflash and you regularly maintain your GC, you'll be able to eliminate a likely cause from the outset. As we go further, you'll see basic inlet maintenance will eliminate most of your problems.